Some legends refuse to die. Deep in the eastern parts of the Netherlands, stories still linger of the Witte Wieven, mysterious women said to appear in the mist, luring the lost into the unknown. But were they spirits, witches, or something far older? I'm Lene. Grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's take a dive into the unknown. When people hear the name Witte Wieven, it is often translated as women in white. But some believe this translation may be wrong. Long before Christianity spread across the Netherlands, the word witte may have meant wise rather than white, connecting these beings not to ghosts, but to ancient women of knowledge. In the regions of Overijssel, Gelderland, and Drenthe, stories tell of women who possessed knowledge beyond ordinary people. They were healers, herbalists, and even seers, women who could heal the sick, speak to spirits, and see beyond the veil of the living. They were respected, feared, and sometimes even worshipped. But legend says that was not the end for them. Over time, their stories changed. Some believed the Witte Wieven became wandering spirits, tied to ancient grave hills and hunebedden, prehistoric burial sites scattered across the Dutch landscape. Others believed they were something else entirely. Elven beings, ancient spirits of the land, much like the dwaallichtjes, they were said to lure travelers into forests, swamps, and moorlands, leading them from the path to never return. In darker tales, they became the restless dead, the spirit of witches, women condemned in life and cursed in death. Some even believed they returned to take revenge on the men who wronged them. But perhaps the strangest part of all, the Witte Wieven were said to know where the lost things could be found. Things like gold, jewels, and even hidden treasures. It was believed they guarded riches beneath the hunebedden and burial mounds, hidden deep beneath the earth. Places like Bargem, Badmen, and Lussenberg still carry those stories of the Witte Wijvenkuil. Deep hollows in the lands, said to be the gateways to where they dwell. And when night falls, the Witte Wieven would emerge, drifting through the fog, watching, waiting. Some described them as beautiful women in white. Others saw something far more terrifying. Old women, clawed hands, hollowed eyes, and sharp teeth, waiting for them in the dark. The legend of the Witte Wieven was just never one story. It has changed, it shifted, and it evolved. And depending on the century or the region, you might hear something entirely different. One of the earliest written accounts dates back to 1586 in Friesland. But here, the Witte Wieven were not wise women. They were witches, fierce creatures said to hunt shepherds in the dead of night, and in some stories, kidnap pregnant women. Their image was dark, violent, something to fear. But 17 years later, in 1660, the story changed. This time, they were described as priestesses, women tied to sacred grave hills, where people came seeking guidance, wisdom, and answers. They were no longer hunters, but guardians of ancient knowledge. And then, in 1691, the meaning has changed again. The name Witte Wieven was no longer understood as white women, but as wise women. Healers, seers, women of ancient knowledge. A meaning that may connect them to something far older than Christianity itself. And perhaps this is where the real mystery begins. How could one legend transform so drastically, from witches to priestess to wise women? To understand that, we have to follow the story across these regions of the Netherlands, because in every region, the Witte Wieven wore a different face. In Overijssel, there is a region called Twente, and in Twente, the Witte Wieven were known as spirits in the hills. Here, they were less like ghosts, and more like something closer to kabouters. which roughly translates to leprechauns. Small hidden beings, tied to the land, living in hills, watching from the earth itself. And unlike darker tales told elsewhere, the Twente Witte Wieven seemed strangely human. Local stories tell of them sneaking out at night to feast on beer and sausages. One story tells of a farmhand who heard the rumors and wanted to see for himself, so he disguised himself as a bundle of straw and hid near a brewing kettle. And before long, they appeared. The Witte Wieven gathered in a circle around the kettle, preparing to drink. But then, they noticed the straw move, and instantly they knew. Something was wrong. The spirits fled into the darkness. But not every man was so lucky. Another tale tells of a drunken farmer who passed too close to their hills. Forgetting the dangers, he wandered near. And he was chased by the Witte Wieven for his mistake. In another story, a farmhand went even further. He challenged them, driving a spit into their hills as an act of mockery. The Witte Wieven answered immediately. They chased him and hurled an axe after him. Legend says the mark of the axe remains visible in the farmhouse door for years. But perhaps the strangest part of all, these stories often speak of bringing the spit. A strange act repeated again and again in Twente and the Achterhoek. The young man would throw a roasting spit towards the hill and speak these words: "Witte Wieven, here I bring you the spit. Now see if you can find a roast to go with it." An insult, a challenge, a dare. And the Witte Wieven, they always answered, chasing the offender back to his farm. And just before the door closes behind them, the spirits would cry out, "If only my shoes had been tied sooner, you would have been the roast." Some say this is where there are strange X-shaped steepletakens on old Twente farmhouses comes from, and a mark says to remember the ex-strides of the Witte Wieven themselves. Gelderland, the Witte Wieven of Sweep. Perhaps the most famous story of the Witte Wieven comes from the village of Sweep, near Lochem in Gelderland. There, on the top of the Lochemse Berg, lies a deep hollow in the earth, a place still known as the Witte Wievenkuil. And according to local legends, this is where they lived. Long ago, a wealthy farmer lived at the foot of the mountain. He had land, wealth, power, but only one child, a daughter named Johanna. Johanna was expected to marry Hendrik, the son of another wealthy farmer, a marriage of status, of wealth, of expectations. But Johanna had already given her heart to someone else, Albert, the son of a poor farmer. And when Johanna's father found out, Albert was forbidden from ever seeing her again. Heartbroken, Albert rode into the night, up the mountain towards the Witte Wievenkuil. His mother had warned him to never go there after dark. The Witte Wieven did not like to be disturbed. But the love clouded his thoughts, and soon he lost his way. The darkness grew heavier, the road disappeared, until suddenly white figures emerged from the mist, silent, watching the Witte Wieven. But instead of harming him, they turned both Albert and his horse around, pointing them back towards safety. Only then did Albert realize he had been moments away from riding straight deep into the pit. The Witte Wieven had saved him. The next day, as a thanks, Albert brought him a cake, an offering, a gift, but Johanna's father still refused to allow their love. So he made a challenge for both Albert and Hendrik, would ride to the Witte Wievenkuil at night and throw an iron spit into the darkness. Whoever returned first would win Johanna's hands. Hendrik went first, but fear overtook him. He threw his spit into the bushes and fled. But Albert rode straight into the darkness. And when he reached the pit, he threw the spit and called out, "Witte Wieven wit, here I bring you the spit." And at once the earth answered. The Witte Wieven came screaming from the pit, their eyes bloodshot, their teeth sharp, their hair wild in the wind. They chased Albert through the night, close enough that he could feel their breath on his neck. But Johanna had prepared. She left the barn door open, a lantern burning inside, and as Albert rode through, she slammed the door shut. Enraged, one of the Witte Wieven hurled the iron spit after him. It struck the door, embedding itself deep into the wood. Albert had survived. Johanna's father kept his word. They were married in the spring. But the strangest part came the next morning. In the mist, laying on the doorstep, was the spit, resting on a plate, both transformed into pure gold. A final gift from the Witte Wieven, proof perhaps that they had chosen Albert all along. Drenthe, the punishment of wandered ottens. In the village of Weesep, in Drenthe, the Witte Wieven were feared for a very different reason. Not because they hunted, not because they lured travelers into the mist, but because they punished those who lied. Long ago, a farmer named Wander Ottens became involved in a land dispute. After new boundaries were drawn, he was unhappy with the sight of his fields. So, under the cover of night, Wander moved the boundary stones himself, shifting the land in his favor. But it did not go unnoticed. The villagers soon realized the stones were being moved, and Wander was confronted. He denied everything. Instead, he blamed the Witte Wieven, saying it was them who moved the stones. It did not take long for the Witte Wieven to hear this, and they did not forgive false accusations. Soon after, Wander was struck deaf. The villagers began calling him Dove Wander, which means deaf Wander. But the punishment did not end there. His child began to scream, day and night, without pause, without reason. The crying never stopped. And though Wander could not hear it, his wife suffered through every moment. Desperate for answers, the neighboring women believed the child had been bewitched. So Wander's wife sought out a duivel banner, a spirit banisher. His advice was strange. Take the child's waist, place it in a pot, and boil it over the fire. From when it boiled, the guilty witch would reveal herself. And so they did. They waited, watched, and when the pot began to boil, the door opened. But it was not a witch who entered, it was Wander himself. As if the truth itself had answered. And not long after, the Witte Wieven appeared at his home. They confessed, yes, they had cursed the child, but not out of cruelty. It was punishment, for blaming them for his own deceit. Yet even the Witte Wieven saw something unfair in it. The child suffered, the mother suffered, more than Wander himself. And so they made him an offer. Confess, tell the truth, admit what you had done. Through signs and gestures, the message was made clear, and at last, Wander confessed. He had moved the stones, he had lied. And 2 days later, his hearing returned, and his child fell silent. In Drenthe, the Witte Wieven were not monsters, they were beings of justice. And perhaps this is what makes the legends of the Witte Wieven so enduring. They were never just one thing. In Friesland they were feared as witches. In Twente they became something closer to hidden spirits of the hills. In Gelderland they acted as protectors and judges. And in Drenthe they became the keeper of justice. One legend, many faces, and perhaps that is the truth to folklore itself. It changes, it adapts, it becomes whatever the people who tell it need it to be. For me, the version from Overijssel has always felt the most familiar to me. Not because it was the most believable, because it was the story I grew up with. The one closest to home. The one who shaped how I first understood the Witte Wieven. But even now, centuries later, the question still remains. Were they ancient women of knowledge? Or spirits of the dead, forgotten priestesses tied to burial mounds? Or something else entirely? Some legends are never meant to be fully understood. So tell me, which phases of the Witte Wieven do you believe? And if you've heard another version of this legend, share it below. Until next time, stay curious, and most importantly, stay out of the mist.